Hi, Charlie. It's time to talk about the August Visa Bulletin. How are you doing?
Great. Another interesting Visa Bulletin that just came out.
I know, but let's start it off with our family based. And why don't you give us your thoughts on family based and if we saw any movement here?
Except for the India fourth preference date, there was no movement. So all chargeability areas remained the same. It was somewhat expected after the movement of those all chargeability dates for the month of June and July. I thought that they might hold them for August, and we can maybe hope for a little bit movement in September. We'll just have to wait and stay tuned.
Okay. And then any comment about the recently released unused family based numbers?
Unfortunately, it appears that the F2A category was approximately 10,000 numbers under the F2A annual limit. That is very surprising to me, and it is an extremely unfortunate situation because the State Department held the F2A date for the last 3 months of fiscal 2024. And this is disturbing because they should have advanced that date in an attempt to maximize number use. I could see them being a couple thousand under the annual limit, but being 10,000 under it and having held that date for 3 months, it's just a waste of numbers which could have been used for applicants last year.
So you think for this year there will be any unused family based numbers or they really try to maximize it for this year?
I think that they should be trying to maximize the numbers. I think that they should, year in and year out, should be within 3 to 7,000 numbers of the annual limit. So again, they should be moving the dates to maximize number use because there's definitely significant amount of applicants waiting to use numbers and not using them all in the family preferences where we have these extensive waiting periods for the applicants. It's a little bit unconscionable. They had a note in the August Visa Bulletin indicating that there were going to be unused India family numbers, which were going to allow or had allowed the India employment fifth preference state to advance. I find that extremely troubling. The India fourth preference should have sufficient demand that the state could advance the India fourth preference date, which is almost a full 2 years behind the worldwide date, and should be able to maximize India family number use in the fourth preference category. So the fact that they've already acknowledged that they're not going to reach the limit and they could have advanced the August India fourth preference date and again move it for September. It's just a very unfortunate thing for India applicants.
And is there anything anyone can do at this point?
No, unfortunately not. And last year we had the same situation. There were about 4 to 5,000 unused Indian numbers in the family sponsored categories last year. Yet you can see a backlog. I mean, for August, they're only moving the date to November 1st of 2006. There are sufficient amount of India fourth preference applicants with dates beyond that. So they should be able to be approaching the India family sponsored limit of 15,820 on a year in and year out basis.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, let's talk about our employment based categories and what are we seeing here? It's a little troubling to see the red arrow that we see. So, why don't you talk a little bit about that for all our chargeabilities or rest of world countries?
Yeah, luckily we continue to see the EB1 current, which is expected. EB2, we had a retrogression. It went from October 15th back to September 1st. When we did the review of the June Visa Bulletin, at that time, I mentioned that I was concerned with the excessive movement of the June employment second preference date, that I thought that it had moved too fast. And because of the large movement, that could require a corrective action later in the year. And we're seeing that happen. So I think it's a little bit unfortunate because, as I mentioned then, they could have moved the date at a slower pace for June, and then maybe moved it a little bit for July and potentially not had to have the retrogression. The only saving grace is that they should be able to maximize number use. So we just may run out of numbers early.
Okay. And then EB3 is holding steady, right?
Yeah, it held steady, but again, I'm concerned with the two movements they did in a row, both the June and July, for the same reason I was concerned with the EB2 June movement. I think that this movement in the EB3 could require corrective action for the month of September.
Okay, well, we have a warning, right? Because we got a note in the Visa Bulletin. So why don't you talk about this whole unavailability information or unavailable?
Yeah, here I really expect that the State Department will announce sometime in early August that the rest of world, the all chargeability areas, employment second preference annual limit will have been reached by early August. And if that were to happen, then the category for additional numbers, people that are not already scheduled for interview at an overseas post during the month of August, no numbers will be available for future use until the new supply in October. That would mean that USCIS would not be able to continue with adjustment of status cases for the remainder of August and September. If it does not happen in August, I definitely believe that for planning purposes, I believe the category will be unavailable for the month of September.
And that means that it's very important that people file their adjustment of status applications in the month of July and August, right? Because
Yes.
when September rolls around, the Visa Bulletin, if it says unavailable, then you can't submit your adjustment of status. So it's important that everyone focus on just getting their adjustments filed if they can.
Exactly. And I think similar to the employment second, for employment third preference, I believe that the rest of world employment third preference limit will be reached at some point in August. Again, if that would happen, there would be no more numbers available. And again, if it doesn't happen in August, I think for planning purposes, everybody should assume that the employment third preference rest of world will be unavailable for the month of September when the bulletin comes out. And if not unavailable, a dramatic retrogression of the date.
And so that basically means that if we see an unavailable, that no adjustments will be approved and no immigrant visas will be issued for that month, correct?
Correct. Now, the category, if they announce it unavailable in mid-month, say, if I'm correct, and they announce that the employment second, the limit has been reached in August, that just means no further numbers. So if you had been scheduled for an interview at an overseas post, say for August 15th at 2 p.m. in London, London should have a visa number for your case.
Ah,
So
okay.
you should be able to appear for your interview and receive a visa. The reason being, the State Department, when they made the determination of the August dates, they allocated a block of numbers to every post equal to the amount of applicants being scheduled by the National Visa Center for interview in that particular month. So when they appear, there should be a number available for them should they be found eligible, despite that the fact that the category had reached its limit subsequently.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that even if it becomes unavailable, there still may be some approvals coming through depending upon when the visa number was requested by
Yes.
state.
So
Okay.
anybody scheduled for an by the National Visa Center for their initial visa interview at an overseas post during August, they should be able to have their visa issued if found eligible, despite that the category subsequently had become listed as unavailable. Now, the flip side of that, if you had been interviewed in London in July and refused for some reason, and you showed up in August and said, "Here, I have the document I forgot to bring. I'm ready for you to do my case," they would have to say, "I'm sorry, the annual limit has been reached. We cannot request additional numbers for your case." So no numbers would be available for comeback cases where the applicant had been scheduled for interview in an earlier month.
So I think it's important that everyone understand that if Charlie's prediction is correct and that if it becomes unavailable in early August, if you get a request for evidence between now and maybe beginning of August, that you submit your RFE response, like you're missing medical or you're missing photos or missing birth certificate as soon as possible
Yeah.
so that you can get your green card approved.
And be sure if you were, to appear for your interview and if you happen to be refused, if you're being processed overseas or in the US, try to overcome that refusal in the month of your original interview. So, particularly in overseas posts where a block of numbers would have been provided for potential use.
Yeah. So just be mindful of that because Charlie's prediction is that they could announce that numbers are unavailable.
Yeah.
And let's go to China. Again, holding steady, no movement. Any comments here?
Nope. But again, as I mentioned with the rest of world dates, the fact that China has moved ahead for both employment second and third for 2 months in a row, that gives me a little pause for visa availability in the month of September. So again, be sure to appear for your interviews in August.
Okay. And then as we look at India, little bit of movement we see in EB3, right? A month. That's
Yeah,
pretty
I
good.
think that part of the reason for the third preference movement is the announcement by the State Department that they believe that there will be unused family numbers from India. Those unused family numbers fall down for potential use in the employment categories, and a percentage is given to each of the categories. So they may feel with those fall down numbers that it will allow the third preference date to advance because they have more numbers available.
Oh, good to know, good to know. And then State Department finally released their number use, right? And so, Charlie, do you have any comments here you'd like to share?
Yes. What I did to prepare this chart is I took the normal annual limit based on the original fiscal 2024 employment limit. And then I looked at how many family sponsored numbers had been used in the China and India categories. In any unused numbers, again, unused family numbers can fall down for use in the employment categories, and say that if there were 1,000 numbers in China unused family, the first, second, and third preference would get 28.6% of those numbers. So they would get 286 numbers be added to the normal limit. So with that type of calculation, I came up with what the actual limits were for both China and India based on the original limit plus the availability of fall down numbers. And you can see that number use by China exceeded the annual limits. So China fared very well in this. Unfortunately, India, with the exception of the first preference, there appears to be basically a tremendous waste of unused India employment second and third preference numbers, approximately 900 unused numbers under the potential limit for second, and about 1,200 numbers were not used in the third. But again, these calculations of the limit, including fall down, are after the fact. So maybe State Department's estimates of India number use in the family were greater than actually transpired.
And can we recapture those
Nope.
unused numbers? No?
Unfortunately, these are wasted. This means that there were, roughly 900 India second preference applicants that could have been processed last year and received their visas. That, in effect, means there would have been 900 additional numbers, 900 more applicants could have been processed this year.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it because it was fiscal year 2024. So we're just going to have to see and hope that they maximize number use for this fiscal year. One of the questions that has been asked is with these travel bans, do you think any of the number use is going to be impacted?
I wouldn't expect it because most of the travel ban countries are not high volume number use countries. If there were a travel ban on China or India or the Philippines, yes, that could have a dramatic impact. But the countries, like I said, which are affected by the travel ban, they really don't use a lot of employment numbers anyway.
So we can still see number used to be the same. And then, of course, as we move towards the end of the fiscal year, so September will be the last Visa Bulletin issued for this fiscal year. And then we'll roll into October. So catch us next month where Charlie will provide his predictions for the new fiscal year as we move into October of 2025. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charlie.
All right, take care.